There is something deeply strange about this painting. The colors are intense, almost electric. The landscape is peaceful, full of flowers, and yet something in the scene produces a discomfort that is difficult to name. A woman lies naked on a meadow. She is asleep, completely unaware of what is happening above her. Because above her, peering over the mountain, there is an enormous creature with a single eye, and that eye is looking down. This is the largest element in the entire painting, the first thing we see when we look at it. And yet, we do not know who it is, we do not know what it wants. We do not know whether the woman is in danger or whether she is being protected. This painting is called the Cyclops, and it was created by the French artist Odilon Redon between 1898 and 1914. It is now held at the Kröller-Müller Museum in the Netherlands. To understand why Redon painted this, you need to know his story. Odilon Redon was born in Bordeaux in 1840. He was a sickly child who spent most of his childhood alone on the family estate, watching the clouds and building his own imaginary world. He described himself as a sad child who sought the shade when others sought the sun. At 30, he was sent to fight in the Franco-Prussian War. When France lost, Redon returned to Paris with a head full of images he could not shake. What followed was a period of nearly 20 years in which he worked almost exclusively in charcoal and lithography. The works he created during that time were completely dark. Spiders with human faces, floating eyes with bat wings, severed heads that smiled. He called that period his noirs, his blacks. But then something changed. Toward the end of the 19th century, Redon began introducing color into his work. And what emerged from that shift was something completely unexpected. His monsters were still there. But now they were bathed in light, surrounded by flowers, and placed within landscapes of almost violent beauty. The Cyclops is perhaps the most recognized work from that period, and although at first glance it seems terrifying, the scene Redon depicts comes directly from Greek mythology. The story begins with Polyphemus, the most famous Cyclops of all antiquity, a one-eyed giant, son of the god Poseidon, known above all for his brutality and ferocity. In Homer's Odyssey, he is the monster who traps Odysseus and his men inside a cave and begins devouring them one by one. But there is another story about Polyphemus, far less known, and it is the one Redon chose to paint. Polyphemus fell in love. Her name was Galatea. She was a sea nymph of extraordinary beauty, and Polyphemus, the man-eating monster, fell for her with a desperation that the ancient poets described as one of the most tragic forms of love. Because Galatea did not love him. She loved Acis, a young Sicilian shepherd, and Polyphemus, unable to bear it, ended up crushing his rival beneath a boulder. If we look carefully at the composition, the first thing we notice is how the space is divided into two completely distinct worlds. In the lower half, Galatea sleeps on a meadow of intensely colored flowers. Her naked body blends into the vegetation so softly that she and the landscape seem to be the same thing. In the upper half, emerging from behind the mountain ridge, is the monster. Polyphemus is enormous. His head occupies almost the entire upper half of the canvas. But what draws our attention is not his size, it is his expression. Because this Cyclops does not have the face of a monster. Some viewers describe his expression as tender, though not everyone agrees. His single eye, disproportionately large, is directed downward toward the woman sleeping below, unaware that she is being watched. And this is where the painting becomes truly unsettling, because we do not know what that gaze means. He could be watching her from a distance to protect her, not wanting to come closer for fear of frightening her with his appearance. Or he could be waiting for the perfect moment to leap on her. I would love to know what you think in the comments. When you look at his expression, do you see a threat or something else entirely? Redon was not the first to paint this story. The myth of Polyphemus and Galatea had been depicted by some of the most important artists in history. Raphael, Poussin, Gustave Moreau, all of them painted the same scene before him. But the fundamental difference between Redon's version and all of those is this: in those earlier works, Polyphemus appears exactly as mythology describes him, a violent and brutal presence looming over the landscape. In this painting, we see something completely different. Redon took one of the most terrifying monsters in Greek mythology and reduced him to a figure shyly peering out from behind a mountain. There is no violent gesture in his posture, no obvious threat in his expression. Where other artists chose to represent the brute force of the myth, Redon chose to represent its interior, and in doing so, he transformed one of the most famous monsters in history into something almost heartbreaking. It is no coincidence that Redon chose this creature specifically. Throughout his entire body of work, the eye was one of his most recurring symbols. In his noirs, he painted eyes floating alone in space, without a body and without context. Eyes mounted on balloons crossing the sky. Eyes that became suns, planets, or entirely independent creatures that belonged to no particular being. In the symbolist tradition, the eye represented knowledge and clairvoyance, but equally, surveillance, a presence that observes without being seen. Redon always refused to give precise explanations of his work. His position was clear: an image should not be defined, it should be felt. As he himself said, his art consisted of putting the logic of the visible at the service of the invisible. And in this painting, that enormous eye peering out from behind the mountain captures exactly that. We do not know with certainty what it represents. We do not know whether it protects or stalks. And that ambiguity is precisely the point. Redon did not want us to understand this image. He wanted us to feel it.